So, most creativity research focuses on ideas, how they form, what makes them original. You start somewhere different.
Okay, you have ideas. What do you do with them? Do you develop them? Do you even start? Or there are influences that make you not even embark on that process? How do you take an idea and bring it to life?
I believe when we say intentionality, it's more about having a certain directedness. Because, whenever we take off on a path, there will always be 15 different options. And mostly people are confused. Do I go here? Do I go there? And if you're ready to sit with the real, genuine question you're looking for, somehow you're able to intentionally direct it. Most people won't immediately connect emotional intelligence to creativity.
Emotional intelligence is not going to give you new ideas. So what is emotional intelligence actually doing? Well, the creative process in itself is challenging. You have an idea, perhaps you start with it, but idea is just the very beginning of the process. There will be false starts, there will be dead ends. And when you get to a dead end, it will be frustrating. And you have to get out of that sense of feeling frustrated. What emotional intelligence does is help us deal with that emotional side of the process.
My guest today has spent more than 2 decades studying a question that sits at the heart of every creative life. Not how to have ideas, but what it actually takes to do something with them. Zorana Pringle is a senior research scientist at Yale University's Center for Emotional Intelligence, where she directs the Creativity and Emotions Lab. Her research spans the full arc of the creative process, from the first decision to act on an idea through the emotional endurance that creative work demands, to the social conditions that allow creativity to flourish or fail. She has published dozens of research articles across psychology, education, and organizational behavior, and has co-edited the Cambridge Handbook of Creativity and Emotions. She is a fellow of the American Psychological Association and has received the Berlin Award for Outstanding Early Career Achievement from the Society for the Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts. Her book, The Creativity Choice, published in 2025, makes an argument that is both simple and radical. Creativity is not a trait you were born with, it's a decision you make and then make again and again through every obstacle the creative process throws at you. What draws me to her work is that she begins exactly where most creativity research stops. Most of us don't lack ideas. What we lack is the willingness, the emotional resilience, and the understanding of ourselves and our environment that it takes to follow through. She has spent her career mapping exactly that gap and showing us with evidence how to cross it. Enjoy today's episode. Hi, Zorana. Welcome to the Creativity Dialogues podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Zorana, what actually really interests me about your work is this is the one dimension that I haven't seen very often. People constantly, when it comes to creativity, keep talking about novelty, usefulness, effectiveness. And a lot of the research is centered in those dimensions. But you look at the person, the creator, and what they face, what they go through, or sometimes what actually stops them from producing. So this is really very interesting because so many people feel stuck with their creativity Or then on the other hand, they don't understand what really enables the people that are able to create. So I feel that today's dialogue will be something of real value to somebody who's seeking more clarity and understanding on this topic.
Thank you. As I was becoming interested in writing for the general audience and translating the science of creativity for everybody who wants to build it in themselves and help others, I saw three big questions. And as you are mentioning, the first one is what might be some barriers? What might be some psychological processes that come in our way? The second one was okay, maybe you get started, but you have to sustain that work. How do you keep making that decision to engage and re engage? We need some tools, we need some strategies, we need to understand what the process requires from us. And the third part of the creativity choice is saying creativity is social even when you are the only one who's creating. We all have this idea of creativity oftentimes resulting from collaboration, but creativity is social even if you are the only one doing something because ideas are coming from interaction and dialogue.
Absolutely. And I'm really looking forward to going into all of these areas in depth and in length to really understand exactly what you're trying to communicate. So, first, I would like to just hear about some of your thoughts and ideas on creativity. So, most creativity research focuses on ideas, how they form, what makes them original. You start somewhere different. Where do you begin?
I do not begin with an idea because I think that we have learned a lot about ideas. And we know that ideas can happen with some facilitation, with some process, and we can get to them. But I want to ask something different. Okay, you have ideas. What do you do with them? Do you develop them? Do you even start? Or there are voices or there are influences that make you not even embark on that process? How do you take an idea and bring it to life? So that is my initial question because I have observed that ideas are actually not the most difficult part of the process. We can train people to be better at it, and that can be learned pretty efficiently. What do we need next?
A lot of people claim that they want to be creative, but they just never follow through. What is happening? Why do they feel this kind of resistance, or why this inability to really manifest the ideas?
It that is a great question, and the question of basic barriers to that initial engagement, initial decision or choice to engage with your ideas. And we say we want creativity because the culture around us values it and celebrates big creative achievements. So we want to be part of that. But being part of that has some requirements. And those requirements are that you take a risk, because by its very definition, creativity is doing something that hasn't been done before. Perhaps that hasn't been done before by you. Perhaps it hasn't been done before in your organization or in your industry. But in some way, it hasn't been done before. It has to be original in some way. And if it is original in some way, there's no step-by-step set of instructions or steps how to get from your idea to its realization. And that means that you have to figure it out as you go, that there's a lot of uncertainty. Psychologically, uncertainty is experienced as risk. And people are very risk averse. Risk is very uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing that you argue is that creativity is a choice. And you've done that very often. And, so that you have to cut through every obstacle. That's a very different claim from what people associate with creativity, that it's a talent, it's a gift, it's a trait. So, what does it mean for all those who really want to get creative? How should they think about it?
I love the list of what creativity is not that you have mentioned. And if we go through that list, we can say, okay, why is creativity not a trait? Well, what does it mean to be a trait? A trait is something that is very general in nature. If you are talkative in one situation, you are likely to be talkative in another situation. Well, creativity is a little bit different because being creative in writing does not mean that you're going to be a creative musician. So there is that component of it's not that general. Another characteristic of a trait is that people really differ on something that is a trait, and there is this assumption of traits being pretty stable in nature. And it is, even personality traits can change during a lifetime, but there is a large element of stability. With creativity, there's a lot we can learn. There's a lot we learn from experience. There's a lot that we can learn through training. So the idea of creativity being a trait is not quite fitting the data.
Right, right. I'd like to first actually begin with a little bit about your background, because this is a rather unusual area to focus on. So, what drew you to this work?
When I started, enter the field of creativity studies, it was a very, very small field. Now, some 25 years later, it is a much bigger field. It is with the spirit of the times. It is growing with the spirit of the times. And it has been wonderful to see that growth. What personally drew me into it is that I was interested in all of psychology. I'm just interested in people. And I had lots of different interests, but I was particularly drawn to interesting people. Now, you might ask, who are interesting people? What does that mean? Is that very subjective? It is very subjective. This is my personal definition of interesting people, but I have realized that what I kind of intuitively thought of as interesting people are creative people, are people who are taking ideas, taking their thoughts and visions, and doing something with them. They are people who have some contradictory things about them, which is a very common characteristic of creative individuals. I wondered, how could it be that this particular group of people tends to be described as introverted but extroverted at times too, playful, almost naive in their outlook, but very serious about what they are doing. Having psychological vulnerabilities, but also great strengths that usually do not go together within same individuals. I wanted to see what it was about these people. And I wanted to ask questions. And I have started asking questions a quarter of a century ago, and I have not stopped until now.
Yeah. Uh, did you have any mentors or influences that actually guided you on this journey to become more certain, more confident on the path that you were taking?
I love that you are using the word confident because what you are implying very strongly in your question is that we learn confidence, that it is something that is acquired. You do not start from having confidence, but as you embark in a certain field, in certain activity, you get there eventually as a journey from doing, not from feeling first. And that was certainly the case for me. I was interested in psychology. I had a great fortune to have a mentor in my doctoral studies who was a great integrator. Jack Mayer, who formulated the theory of emotional intelligence, could see connections in bodies of research that other people do not tend to see. So, in working on emotional intelligence, he has brought together research on perceiving emotions and managing emotions and understanding emotions, which were all separate and not really talking to each other. He was also a great personality theorist, and I have really learned this process of stepping back and looking at diverse areas of scholarship and saying, how does it all come together? And I had other mentors in different roles, very close colleague, a person who started as a mentor and became a very close colleague and collaborator, James Kaufman, who is a great thinker in the area of creativity studies, and a person who everybody in the field collaborated with from different perspectives. And I was very much inspired by the work of Robert Sternberg, who was the first in the early 2000s to suggest looking at creative process as a process of decision making. And I was very intrigued by this idea and wanted to see what would that entail. What would that entail, not just as a cognitive process, but also as a process that speaks to emotions and how we manage emotions, and that has a social component to it.
Yeah, I think that this is really the work that you do is of so much of value, because the part that we ignore is we think that some people are just geniuses. They just know it all and they're perfect and they can just do it, ignoring the fact that we are all human, born with equal possibilities. But some people are just not able to cross that barrier and to figure themselves out before they can really create anything. So I think the work that you do of really helping break the barriers and really helping them to understand themselves is really the most valuable work. But before I get to that, I'm curious to know, how do you define creativity? I say this because there is the standard definition of novelty and usefulness, which is something new, something useful. But I also feel that that's a little inadequate. It doesn't really show the whole spectrum or explain it. Especially, I feel that this definition comes more from the academic perspective. But the practitioner, this definition somehow doesn't do justice to the practitioner's experience of creativity. So I'd be very interested in knowing, how do you define creativity?
I start with a standard definition of creativity. Just like you said, there's an element of novelty or originality there, and there is an element of quality that we variously call with different names. and you have mentioned usefulness. And I have spent a lot of time thinking of what this aspect of quality really means. And I think that diving into its nature really opens up a range of what creativity could be. So if we think of quality as something that is personally meaningful, that can be one aspect, one kind of creativity. So we are doing something that is original in relation to our personal prior experience. Potentially, other people have invented the same thing in their own experience. But for you, it is very meaningful because it is a new insight. And then we can talk about, okay, sometimes you just have to follow the task. And quality could be being appropriate for the task, managing to be original while also staying within some confines. And that is a great challenge. So that element of task appropriateness can be a great challenge to respond to in creativity. And that is oftentimes the case in school, where you have certain parameters you're working with and you have to stay within them, but maybe the challenge is that you can still be original in some way. And then we are talking about professional creativity in what we are doing, what we could be doing professionally, where our careers are taking us, and where we are taking them. It is always a dynamic process and always a developmental process. And there we are talking about that quality of being effective. You are achieving some goals, and those goals can be different. What is an effective artwork or a piece of music is very different than what is an effective gadget, because one has emotional effects and the other one is solving some physical problem. It is working the way it's supposed to be working, and solving our problems that way. But I think the word effectiveness can be holding those multiplicities. And then at certain times, we are really talking about longevity or the level of influence. And that can be influenced through time or influenced through space, reach of certain ideas or performances or products, something that we are contributing. I think that, and other people have recently struggled and engaged with your question in relation to new technologies, and suggested that we add the component of intentionality to the definition of creativity. Now we have to really engage with the word intentionality. What do we mean by intentionality? There is I was just recently conducting interviews with artists, and they do not relate to the word intentionality because they associate it with having a preconceived idea or a notion that you start with, and now you are developing it or embodying it. But in their experience, they start with the process, and through the process, ideas and visions emerge. So they didn't really identify with the word intentionality. We do not need to have a final conclusion, but this is a dialogue, and that's what I like about the title of your podcast. The word dialogue, as we are continuing a conversation in relation to new developments, new technological developments, new societal developments.
Right. Where you just spoke about intentionality, I personally have a little bit of a different opinion on that, because I believe when we say intentionality, it's more about having a certain um, directedness. Because, whenever we take off on a path, there will always be 15 different options. And mostly people are confused. Do I go here? Do I go there? And if at the heart of it, if you're ready to sit with the real, genuine question you're looking for, somehow you're able to intentionally direct it. But that's only after you're very clear on what you're really doing in the first place. So that cannot come before the idea is fully formalized. So exactly what you're trying to do, I believe, has to become clear before then the process. So this would sit more, I think, in the idea of the process. So between novelty, that just the idea coming, and then for it to reach its manifestation, I think that intentionality might, be that bridge to sort of help to direct it a certain way. And that's not enough by itself. I think there's other factors like authenticity, courage, values, and it would be a combined bag. So personally, I call that agency to convert from novelty to value. But that's what, as you said, the dialogues are to sort of clarify these ideas. Another question that comes to mind is, why is there so much of misconceptions in the field of creativity? Why so many conflicting ideas and opinions?
Well, there are misconceptions that are out there floating in our culture. And why are they there is a great question, and I would not pretend to have an answer. um, so I am not going to necessarily venture to speculate, but we see how they manifest. We see that the myth that creativity is the same as the arts is very prevalent. In English, there is a word creative, which can be an adjective and traditionally was an adjective, but it can also be used as a noun, where it's a kind of, it refers to kind of work, a kind of person doing a kind of work that is particular in nature and usually has artistic components to it. So art, design, perhaps advertising. As the sphere of creativity. And I find that word very unfortunate because it limits what creativity could be and who can see themselves as potentially creating or having creative potential. We also see how people come up with those ideas, because if those messages are out there in the culture telling us that creativity is something that is God-given gift, or creativity is something that you are just born with, think of those talent shows. What is the feedback being given to people who do exceptionally well? You have it, you are born with it, this is who you are and who you've always been. And that is going to create particular ways of looking at it, of taking it as a gift and by extension as something that you don't have very much agency over because you either have it or you do not have it.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm looking forward to getting to your real work. So if we can begin with emotion and creativity. You work at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Most people won't immediately connect emotional intelligence to creativity. Can you help us understand that?
I thank you for asking that question. And I think there's a very simple reason why people don't think of it. because the idea that creativity is inherently and primarily and fundamentally about coming up with new ideas is so strong that we wonder, well, why would emotional intelligence help? It's not going to give you new ideas, and it's not. Emotional intelligence is not going to give you new ideas. It's not going to help you ask new questions if you are a scientist. It's not going to give you new inspiration if you are a visual artist. It's not going to make you perform better if you are a performer. So what is emotional intelligence actually doing? Well, the creative process in itself is challenging. You have an idea, perhaps you start with it, but idea is just the very beginning of the process. And having something that is alive in the world it's going to take a long time. And because it is something that is original, it's not going to be a smooth or linear process. There will be false starts, there will be dead ends by its very definition. And when you get to a dead end, it will be frustrating. And you have to get out of that sense of feeling frustrated or feeling overwhelmed or feeling stuck in order to re-engage and in order to, well, maybe take a few steps back to take as many steps as necessary forward. And what I have found in my own research is that for people who tend to think in original ways, have that potential for creativity, what emotional intelligence abilities do is that they help people persist in their work. So even in the face of obstacles, and they help them maintain their interest, not say, well, I don't care about that anymore, which is often something that happens, and maybe it's real, maybe it's not. Maybe it is a way of protecting ourselves from those experienced difficulties along the way. So what emotional intelligence does is help us deal with that emotional side of the process.
You say that emotions are not just feelings, they're information. What do you mean by that?
It is great that you paused with saying, well, we know them as feelings. Emotion scientists say they are information. What does that mean? It's counterintuitive, and it is really puzzling, very abstract when we say that. Well, let's take an example. Let's take an example of anger. Anger is a feeling. It has physical manifestations of activation in our body. It is not pleasant. It is very activated. But anger is also evoked by particular kinds of situations. And if you pay attention, we realize that anger is telling us we are seeing something that we consider to be an injustice. Whether that is a child's that's not fair, or whether that is seeing an injustice done in the world. And once we identify it as such, we have a little bit of a clue what would be a potential way of reacting to it. If it is an injustice, perhaps we can ask ourselves, how can that injustice be righted? Or if we take another example, frustration. What does frustration say? Frustration conveys information that we have reached an obstacle. There is a problem in our approach. And once we realize we are feeling frustrated, we can use that information and say, well, it means I need to change my approach. What I have been doing is not working. I need to do something else.
Yeah, I think this is of great value because I think that creative people, which could be everyone in a way, perhaps is stuck because of this very block of not understanding emotions. Do you feel that once these are clarified, there is a certain openness, a kind of lightness that creativity demands? That it's we ourselves that weigh ourselves down, that we actually don't allow our wings to take flight because the weight of our own emotions, unaddressed, unclear emotions that are really weighing us down. So, do you believe that really this clearing up of the emotions, of understanding, will that give us the light to really take flight?
I think the crucial word that you have mentioned is unaddressed. It is not so much an issue of what we are feeling, but how we are addressing those feelings. I have recently come across a quote by Georgia O'Keeffe, and she said that she was terrified of everything she ever did in her life. However, that never prevented her from doing it. That comes back to something you have mentioned earlier, the idea of courage, of it is not that you are fearless, it is that you accept the fear and are choosing to react in a particular way. And do we need the lightness to engage in creativity? I do not believe we need. It is perhaps easier at times if we manage to get to that lightness. But we do not necessarily need it. What we do need is to address what feelings we have. And there, it's an issue of how we are seeing the situations, how we are identifying on a very granular level what is going on, so that we are not just saying, I am feeling stressed. In today's world, we say, I am feeling stressed a lot. But that stress could take a form of being disappointed or feeling frustrated or feeling uncertain. And all of those will be addressed or could be addressed in different ways.
Your research actually shows that different emotional states are useful for different parts of the creative process. So, can you sort of expand a little bit on that?
We sometimes think that there are good emotions and bad emotions. And people often ask me what emotions are helpful for creativity. And I start answering that question by a comment that is the wrong question. What really we need to know is what emotions are good for what kind of thinking. And something as complex as creativity, that is not just coming up with ideas, it is coming up with ideas, judging the quality of those ideas, developing them, deepening them, requires all kinds of thinking. So there isn't just one kind of feeling that is going to be helpful. And we know from research at the intersection of emotion and cognition that energized, happy moods broaden our thinking. And when they broaden our thinking, we can see different perspectives. We can be playful or spontaneous or try out ideas that are original and different. So that is good for idea generation when we are thinking of new ideas. But let's say that we already have an idea. Now we have started developing it. Let's say that you are a writer and you are writing something new. Now you have to also tell what's the quality of those things that you have thought of and that you are starting to develop. And we are better at judging quality in more subdued moods. just try to imagine feeling a little bit down or feeling a little bit pessimistic. It colors what we see, and it helps us find those things that are a problem, imagine things that could become obstacles, and be proactive about it. We can then use that agency we have in order to direct and be more successful in judging our ideas and in directing our future work.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with your philosophy on this. I've just always wondered that why is it when creatives or the practitioners, people who create, why do they always love to talk about how their ideas or their topics came from dark periods in their life when they were going through a lot of trauma and difficulties? I've always really just wondered about this, that what's this connection, or should I say this paradox, that do you feel that one has to go through a dark kind of phase to just kind of perhaps surrender? And then suddenly there's a sort of light towards some ideas. There's a thing that now I'm beyond being disturbed anymore. And do you feel that that then allows the light of positivity to sort of emerge in some way?
I don't know about the light of possibility emerging from dark experiences, but there are some clues in what you are talking about from existing research. One is from research on something that scholars have called the diversifying hypothesis. And that hypothesis is saying that it helps the creative process to be different in some way. And one of the ways we could be different is having difficult experiences. Those difficult experiences could be instances of trauma or something challenging that happened in our lives, like loss of loved ones. But there could be other diversifying experiences too, that are not necessarily negative in nature, such as spending substantial amount of time in a culture that is not your native one. What these scholars have argued is that the experience of being different from people around you in some way, whether that is an experience of a difficulty or a new culture, gives you a different perspective. And that having a different perspective and holding perspectives of those around you and your own can be generative for creativity. And people have found evidence for more creative achievement in different kinds of groups that had different kinds of diversifying experiences. And another thing that you might be alluding to also is the research on mental health, and especially in relation to artistic domains. And in artistic domains of creativity, there seems to be some relationship between emotional difficulties and creative achievement. It seems to be limited to artistic areas, and often those difficulties are also paired with some psychological strengths through which creative expression can happen. And sometimes there are observed benefits to creative expression. So there is a little bit of a loop of some psychological strengths paired with difficulties, giving birth to creativity, and then creativity in itself being a way of coping.
I'd like to now move onto the self and the creative identity. You describe three things that shape whether someone takes the first step: creatively. Anticipating social consequences, internal anxiety, and whether creativity feels important to their sense of who they are. Can you explain them?
I was very interested in seeing what goes on in people's minds as they are considering whether to engage with their ideas, whether to share them, whether to get started on them. And we have identified those three big kinds of concern, where one is other oriented, it is projecting a fear or an anxiety about how others will react, some kind of negative social consequence. And that can take different forms. So people can project that others, whoever those others are, maybe it's mentors, maybe it is bosses, leaders that we work with, are going to be angered by our ideas, or they could perceive it as stepping on toes, getting outside of line, or just plain not consider it as silly. So that is one kind of concern. Another kind of concern is more inward oriented, where it's a calculation of whether it is better to be safe than sorry. Those experiences of self consciousness when even trying to imagine sharing ideas. And then a third concern, it's not really concern in the negative sense that we usually associate with that word, but it is consideration of creativity is important to who I am. I need to do this. I want to do this. Sometimes creators say that they did not have a choice, that it was so strongly part of their identity that they did not even perceive a choice as doing it or not doing it. It is the choice, but they have already pre-made the choice in a sense. And these are not the kinds of people. These are the kinds of concerns that we have in our minds. And we can have multiple concerns. It is possible, like with the example of Georgia O'Keeffe, with the example of Paul Cézanne, who has written a lot about the difficulty in the creative process and the anxieties, internal considerations. It is possible to have that personal identity of this is really important to me. And yes, I will do it in spite of these other unpleasant parts of it that still occur to me. So it is possible to have anxiety while also having that commitment and importance of creativity as a part of who we are.
Just to expand a little bit on this very thing, there's something in your work that reminds me of authenticity. The idea that creativity requires a willingness to say that this matters to me, this is who I am, even before the world confirms it. So, how does this quality show itself in creativity?
When we are acting in accordance to who we are and our personal identity, that is what authenticity means, is we are acting as ourselves and not as something that is imposed on us, or not in a way that maybe we think we should. So if we are acting in that way, we are going to be making an active decision. We are going to be exerting personal agency to make choices towards creativity. When given a choice, so whether to go an easier route, which is more familiar and which is something that we have done before, or the one that is trying to push the boundaries, it's striving for something original, then we are going to choose to take that road that may be more difficult.
Your research on creative self-efficacy shows it's a stronger predicator of creative behavior than talent or intelligence. How do people develop that belief?
Creative self-efficacy is a belief that you can rise to the occasion, that you can be creative, and that yes, I can. Yes, I can attitude. Importantly, this attitude is not an all or nothing proposition. People differ in how strong this belief is. People differ in their conviction, in their confidence. But also, it's not just that different people differ, that one person is more confident than another person. It is also that at different times, we have more or less confidence in what we are doing. Creativity does not require absence of doubt. And anybody who has done anything creative in their lives is very clear on that, that doubt seeps into the creative process. And moreover, confidence and doubt can coexist. It sounds like a paradox, but they can exist in the same person, even in the same time, where you have an inkling that you can do something, but you also are not really sure. And that's where that idea of how do we address these feelings comes back into play.
I really liked the word you used of confidence, because I feel that we kind of take it for granted. I remember that there was once a very famous singer in India, and he was asked the reason for his incredible success. And he said, it's just one word. He said, it's confidence. And later on, I sort of identified it with how when he wasn't that successful, I saw that really his confidence was quite different from the way it was in the beginning. So, I wonder whether could this be the one main reason why somebody who gets a creative idea and doesn't go and manifest it, as against somebody who has the idea and who actually not just goes and manifests it, but keeps manifesting it. Would you say that that's true, or is there a different way to understand it?
That is certainly part of the story. Confidence helps make that decision of, yeah, I'm going to do it because I think it is possible for me to do it. Makes that decision easier. However, we do not have to start with confidence. And in your example of a singer who earlier in a career, his confidence looked different than later on when he was well established, well known, and secure in his accomplishment, it's going to be different. So we do not have to start with that, of course, I'm confident, and exuding it. We have to start with a maybe. It is enough to start with a maybe. If we consider confidence as fuel for the creative process, imagine what else takes fuel. Imagine our cars taking fuel. They take electric charge, or they take liquid charge, and we can get part way to our destination with part of the tank or part of a charge. We do not need it to be completely at full, and we have to remind ourselves of it. The thing that is important is that once we get part way there, we can recharge, because we can look back and say, I have accomplished something. I have accomplished something that was not certain whether it was possible, and I couldn't have known whether it's going to go this way. And once you realize that, that confidence grows. So it is something, it is not really a skill, it is a level of energy that grows with experience and reflection on that experience.
I would like to now move on emotional regulation and creative courage. You're right about the fact that truly fearless people are rare, and that fearlessness is not actually the goal. What is the goal?
The goal is to say that I have some doubts. I know this is not exactly comfortable. I have some uncertainties that I can foresee in trying to do something creative, but I am going to do it anyway. This is an affirmative choice I'm making to do something with the idea that I have and bring it to life. Not because I am fearless, but because I will be able to dress those feelings, read those messages that emotions are telling me, and manage them.
How do emotionally intelligent people handle rejections differently from those who aren't?
Rejections are part of the creative process. Imagine any kind of creativity. Imagine being a performer and getting critical reviews from the audience or from the critics. Imagine being a scientist, submitting research that you perhaps worked for a very long time on. Sometimes it takes years. And then you get critical feedback or a straight out rejection for it. Imagine being a writer who submits a novel for publication and gets one rejection after another. We all know stories like that. We all know stories of entrepreneurs who make it big in the end, but have started with many rejections. So rejection is an inherent part of the creative process. It is going to happen one way or another. What emotional intelligent people do that is different is that they ask themselves, what is this telling me? Is it telling me that I am fundamentally not capable of doing this? Or is a rejection telling me that I did not succeed yet? That perhaps I have to find a new approach. Perhaps I have to find a new outlet. Perhaps I have to change something in what I have done. But what is that fundamental information that I'm getting from the situation? If people decide that the message is that they are fundamentally not capable, they are going to give up.
Mm.
Emotional intelligent people are capable of questioning that and seeing a broader range of explanations and use strategies to get to a different explanation and different next action.
I'd like to now move to the social dimension. You argue that creativity is social even when it doesn't seem to be. What do you mean by that?
Imagine doing something that is solitary. I have written a book, and the creativity choice was written by me and me only. There was no ghostwriter, there were no helpers. I was the only writer. So it sounds like a solitary activity, and it is solitary in the sense that I was sitting in a coffee shop or in Barnes and Noble and putting words on the computer. However, our ideas, what become our work, does not come from a social vacuum. It comes from reading, in my case, as a scientist, as a communicator, from reading scientific research that other people have done previously, engaging with those ideas, reacting to some in a way of, well, I am not so sure, or I disagree, or how about, and reacting to others as, this is wonderful, and I think it relates to something else. And I think it fits in the greater picture in these ways. So we are learning from others implicitly in these ways, and we are learning from others explicitly when we are engaging in conversations, when we are collaborating with others, when we are presenting at conferences and hearing people's questions and their reactions. And in different fields, those social implicit and explicit aspects are going to look somewhat different, but they always exist.
Your research on weak ties and strong ties, that different relationships are useful at different stages of the creative process, is counterintuitive. Can you explain how that works in practice?
This is wonderful research by an organizational psychologist, Dr. Jill Perry Smith, who has looked at how people's social connections, their social networks, contribute to their creative work, whether they're going to enrich it or limit it in some ways, and how they can do that at different stages of the creative process for different kinds of creative tasks. And she and her team have found that when we are coming up with ideas or exploring the ideas, we really benefit from people who are not close to us, those who are the outskirts of our social networks. Perhaps we see them once a year at a conference, or we are connected to them through social media interactions. And we start a conversation that then sparks something new. Why is that? Well, consider what happens when somebody is at the outskirts of your social network. You have different background than they do. They have different circles in which they walk. And you don't know exactly how they think, and you don't know exactly you don't know each other's thinking very intimately. And therefore, what you learn from that person or how the conversation goes is likely to provide you different perspective, because it is the perspective of people who are going to think influenced by those different circles in a different way than you already do. So it's going to spark something new. But when you are already committed to an idea and working to develop it, working with somebody who's close is going to be really helpful, because their approach is to say something that is supportive at first. They're going to say, yes, that is a great idea. Have you also considered? And that way they're going to deepen your thinking process.
Yeah, I think you already kind of answered my next question, which was that most people think of creativity as something that happens inside the individual. But you're saying that the environment, the leader, the organization fundamentally shapes whether creativity happens at all. So this idea that that what does genuine creativity, how is it supported from the environment? I was just wondering that have we addressed all the ideas that support it, or has anything been left?
Certainly, the environments in which we find ourselves matter. And they matter in some ways that are very obvious. And they're so obvious that at times we don't even think about them. Right now, if somebody wanted to be creative in physics, they are not going to be inventing a way to produce electricity using faraway transportation systems like Tesla did in early 20th century, because those problems have already been solved. So there's a historical component of What are the problems that are available? What are the kinds of questions that are brewing in the culture and for which the culture is technologically or otherwise ready? And sometimes we lose track of that because it seems very obvious and therefore we don't notice it. What is more immediate in our everyday consideration is that team in which we work, the organization in which we work, the culture in our community. So what is crucial there in the most immediate level is an experience of psychological safety. That is the experience of not having to be afraid of retaliation if you share your ideas. There is enough safety that you can utter something that you don't know how others are going to respond to. You know, at least they're not going to respond to extremely harshly. And that enables your participation and sharing and then development through that commitment to the decision of engaging in the creative process.
Zorana, you co-edited a book on crisis and creativity. Does crisis genuinely unlock creativity?
We sometimes say that creativity is the mother of invention, and that suggests that, well, that necessity is mother of invention. And well, if there is necessity, it may be that there is a crisis, something that is immediate, something that evokes a strong reaction and requires us to respond in a different way. So the consequence, the circumstance of crisis could enable creativity. What has worked before is not going to work in a crisis because it's a brand new kind of situation we find ourselves in. We have all experienced it in time of COVID. It was a crisis. And what we have done before, we couldn't do now because, well, we couldn't even get together. But the answer is not very simple because, yes, crises provide opportunities for creativity, but they also provide the circumstances that can support it. And that is less obvious. So we need to be in those kinds of environments that are going to provide the resources we need. We know that both in the UK and in the US, for instance, during the COVID crisis, there was a boom in entrepreneurship. And it can be traced to governmental action providing resources for people who were left without income. And it was a great boom. So in that case, resources that were available enabled a form of creativity in form of entrepreneurship. But that is not always the case.
Zorana, thank you so much for shedding so much of light on this ignored area. Just as a closing question, you've spent your career studying what it actually takes to move from an idea to action. How does one move from idea to action?
One starts with a decision, with a single choice, and an acknowledgement that that choice has to be made repeatedly and that there will be ups and downs and that we have to recommit through the ups and downs. There is an emotional side to the creative process, but the good news is that we do have agency even in relation to our emotions. And there's something we can do if we learn to read them, learn from them, and manage them.
Thank you so much, Zorana. This was a truly insightful conversation on the aspects that one really doesn't quickly connect to creativity. So, thank you so much for shedding light on this most essential dimension involved in the process of creativity. Thank you so much for coming to our podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.